So this fall, I went to listen to a talk by Lucy Kalanithi, the widow of the late Paul Kalanithi, who authored the New York Times bestseller book, When Breath Becomes Air, which is his very brave account writing about his own death. And her talk was about making sense of her life after the death of her husband, who died in 2015. Their daughter, Katie, was conceived during his illness after he had already been diagnosed as being terminally ill. And Katie was just 8 months old when he died. And so Lucy's talk, her talk was about grappling with crippling grief after her husband had died. And her talk was centered around that most famous of books by Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, entitled Man's Search for Meaning. So Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, was first published in 1946. And it really is a meditation on what the gruesome experience of his imprisonment in Auschwitz taught him about the primary purpose of life, the search for meaning, which sustained those who survived the Holocaust. So of course I just had to revisit the book. And for Frankl, meaning in life comes from three sources: work, love, and suffering. Work, love, and suffering. And of these three things, work is easy to comprehend. Work is oftentimes where, of course, we find our purpose. That makes sense, surely. And then love, of course, almost duh. That love is the source of life's meaning is, I think, obvious to all of us. But what Frankl knows for sure is that in addition to work, in addition to love, suffering makes life meaningful. And I admit to you, I struggled with that third one, suffering. I mean, this is a man who went through the Holocaust. Suffering gives meaning. So it really seems so inscrutable to me, even incomprehensible. I just couldn't understand how in suffering we find meaning. I was stumped. So I began to ponder more, flesh this idea out, explore. And as I began to explore, I came kind of at it in a slightly different way. And I came to the conclusion that in a reframe of this, in reframing it, I could understand it better. Is that suffering is what binds us together. Suffering makes us recognizable to each other. Another way to say it, maybe, is that our suffering, our losses, are the instantly recognizable thing that we see and know in the other human. Our lostness, our losses, our yearning, maybe even our homesickness, if you will, is our common binding agent. And it's why we're here tonight. Our shared communal loss, losing our moms, our grandparent, our husband, our vulnerability cracks us open and brings us together. And it really is more of a condition of life than a quality. Maybe yet another way to go at it, another way to say it, is that this loss is the bedrock we share. Our lostness is the connective tissue between us all. You lost your mother. So did I. And it sucks. But we all, every one of us, gets our hearts broken. And you know what? We're kind of awkward in our suffering. We're awkward with the suffering of others. But we know it, we see it in each other. And just acknowledging this binding agent, and that's the phrase that Nick Cave uses, this binding agent. Acknowledging this lostness, our mutual suffering, somehow, some way, makes life easier. There's an American poet, Naomi Shihab Nye, and in one of her poems, the last two lines are this: before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. And so this is a consolation, I suppose. Suffering should not be done alone. There are those powerful words, again, you are not alone. We recognize our loss in each other's faces. We know I am connected to you because I know. So empathy is the companion to sorrow. Empathy springs from our suffering. And so, yes, I get it. Work, love, suffering. Suffering, I see yours, you see mine. And is there really anything more meaningful than that? Is there a greater tie that binds? There's also some other really good news, and I don't know who said this to credit it, but it said that words make worlds. Words make a world. Words create worlds. Stories can heal us. Stories can bring us together. It was Isaac Dinesen, the Danish writer. She has a wonderful saying that I think is true. She said, any sorrow can be born if it can be made into a story. Any sorrow can be born if it can be made into a story. Or a story can be told about it. So story is the healer. Story gives us power. And of course, words, I always bump up against this in my work, but words are so puny. Words are so inadequate. But words and stories are all we've got. And when we say goodbye these days, our funerals are not really called funerals much anymore. They're called celebrations of life. I'm called a celebrant. And stories are at the heart and soul of the goodbye for our person. We tell their story, our story. We revel in our person through their stories with us. And so they're embedded with us in story. They're embodied in story. They're incarnate in story. So in my work as a celebrant, I say this as really a truth. There's no greater joy for me or for my funeral families. Yes, it's my families. I call them that too. Than to sit around the kitchen table or maybe the living room of their home, because homes are our museums for stories. And we just tell stories. We collect stories. The stories just spill out. We remember our loved ones back to us through stories. Dr. Naomi Remen, she was the one who wrote Kitchen Table Wisdom, said, there's a powerful saying that we tell each other stories. Sometimes we need a story more than food in order to live. Stories tell us about who we are, what is possible for us, what we might call upon. And stories also remind us that we are not alone with whatever losses or struggles we face. Our person, the person we have lost, is inextricably and tightly woven together with us in our stories. We live on with our lost person because they are bound up in our story together with us. Our story then, our story now, before, after. And I want to read you an example of how our person remains with us in our continued lived story, of how our person remains with us even when they're not with us in physical presence. And again, this is from Lucy, the widow. And she writes in the epilogue of When Breath Becomes Air, and I should also add that she was the one who actually finished Paul's unfinished book when he died. She writes this: I expected to feel only empty and brokenhearted after Paul died. It never occurred to me that you could love someone the same way after he was gone. That I would continue to feel such love and gratitude alongside the terrible sorrow. The grief was so heavy that at times I shivered and moaned under the weight of it. Paul is gone. And I miss him acutely, nearly every moment. But I somehow feel I'm taking part in the life we created together. It's our story. And then she quotes C.S. Lewis. Bereavement is not the truncation of married love. Bereavement is not the truncation of married love, C.S. Lewis writes, but one of the regular phases, like the honeymoon. What we want is to live our marriage well and faithfully through that phase too, through every phase. And Lucy goes on, caring for our daughter, nurturing relationships with family, publishing this book, pursuing meaningful work, and she's a physician and a professor, visiting Paul's grave, grieving and honoring him, persisting. My love goes on. My love lives on in a way I never expected. Because after all, what is grief but love persisting, love persevering? Thomas Lynch is another amazing poet who writes about loss. He's actually the guy who got me into this business. And he said, we become the things we miss, the ones we love. They remain. I see my father in my brother. I see my mother in my sisters. I see my mother in my daughter. And I see my friend holding her late mother dearly with her through her life. So our love and connection with our significant mothers, while we're here on earth together, is sometimes kind of inefficient. And inefficient is the word that he uses. Our expression of love to each other, it oftentimes does fall short. We often fail to adequately show and tell our love to our loved ones in this life. And in this life, we just can't get across to our precious ones how unspeakably in love we are. There is something inefficient, and so difficult to adequately let them know. But the thing about the dead, again, my favorite poet about loss is saying, the thing about the dead is that they know our hearts. They know our hearts. He writes, my daughter, even though she is not physically here, she knows my heart more than she ever did when she was here. And so I have to behave as if I'm known, truly known by her. I live knowing that she knows my heart. And she now fully knows how much in love with her I have always been. She knows. It's as though we become more known to them after our person departs. We want them to know our intentions. We want them to know our motivations and our heart. And this is his phrasing, which I quite like. But we're sort of happily haunted by the people who loved us. They're still connected to us, those we have argued with, those who love us, those who know our foibles. They still happily haunt us. We know them, we know who they are, and they know us. Yes, they do know our hearts after they're gone. But after some time passes in the distillation of the ringer of our intense grief, we often come to know that we know them better too. We see them for who they are. We understand them better. So yes, they might know our hearts, but we also come to know them better. When I'm gathering the stories of the one who has passed, sitting around the kitchen table, I might ask, what is the truest thing you could say about your person? Tell me about your mom, your husband. How did they love? What were they passionate about? What is one small, sweet moment you have shared with them that you can tell me? And that is, of course, what we include in the obituaries we write, in our eulogies and our remembrances, tributes, in our remembered stories of our person. Another sage and poet, I think this is kind of a collection of sage wisdom by the poets, but another sage poet, David White, wrote, an elegy, a good elegy, is always a conversation between grief and celebration. The grief of the loss of the person and the celebration that you were here at all to share the same planet with them. What I know for sure is that you still carry your person with you. Your mom is with you. Your husband is with you. World you once occupied together, it still lives on in you. So we can say this, and we know this for sure, that it was glorious. That it was glorious have loved her or him. And it is so fine to still remain in connection to them, our person, our adored one. And our grief is a manifestation of our persisting love. Blessings upon you. And extravagant blessings upon your loved one. In your program, there is a poem. It's called We Remember Them by Sylvan Kamens and Jack Reimer. And kind of in keeping with the theme of our tight, ongoing connection with our person, I wanted us to say this poem together, We Remember Them. And I'm going to ask you to echo together this one refrain, We Remember Them, after I say a line. And it's just kind of a beautiful call and response of our pledge to remember a person through every season, always. We remember them. At the rising sun and at its going down, we remember them. At the blowing of the wind and in the chill of the winter, we remember them. At the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. At the blueness of the skies and in the warmth of summer, we remember them. At the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of the autumn, we remember them. At the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them. As long as we live, they too will live, for they are now a part of us as we remember them. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When we have decisions that are difficult to make, we remember them. When we have joy we crave to share, we remember them. When we have achievements that are built upon theirs, we remember them. For as long as we live, they too will live, for they are now a part of us as we remember them. I would like to invite Shelley staff for the reading of the names.
I'm going to have a brief slideshow before we read the names. Martin and Beverly Brown.
Cecilia and Frederick Becker.
Dennis Van Beek.
Gabriel Zimmerman.
Robert McCoy.
Daniel Skipping.
Lawrence Monson.
Michelle Skipping.
Linda Torkinson.
Deborah Conmore.
Adrian Allen.
Louis Sackett.
Mary Allen.
Julie Becker.
Nancy Callahan.
Susan Lee.
Jean Berman.
Napoleon Valcourt.
Neil Malcraft.
Nancy Lillers.
Jan Nurma.
Carl Heimdall.
Daniel Skiffington.
Emmy Kawai.
Michelle Skiffington.
Jonathan Grindell.
Georgian Bev Adderson.
George Heiser.
Charles and Betty Adderson. And Charlotte Sutphin.
We're going to do a candle lighting ceremony, and unlike the years past, where we kind of had our own candles and a staff person came down and lit them, on the aisle, we're going to ask you to come forward and take a candle from the basket up here, light your candle, and bring it back to your seat. And while we're doing that, we're going to have Veronica sing for us again. And once everyone's back in the seats, the lights, I think, are going to go a little bit low. And then when they turn back on the lights, we're going to sing from our program, Hark the Heralds, Angels Sing. Veronica.
Thank you.
back of the program, Hark the Herald Angels Sing. Let's sing it together.
Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King. Peace on earth and mercy mild, God and sinners reconciled. Joyful all ye nations rise, join the triumph of the skies. With angelic hosts proclaim, Christ is born in Bethlehem. Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King. Christ by highest heaven adored, Christ the everlasting Lord. Late in time, behold him come, offspring of a virgin's womb. Veiled in flesh, the Godhead see, hail incarnate deity. Jesus, man with men to dwell, Jesus, our Emmanuel. Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King. Hail the heaven-born Prince of Peace, hail the Son of Righteousness. Light and life to all he brings, risen with healing in his wings. Mild he lays his glory by, born that man no more may die, born to raise the sons of earth, born to give them second birth. Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King.
Before we dismiss and gather the gifted ornament from Washelli in remembrance of our person, I just wanted to offer you a very short blessing, if I may. And it really is at times like this, I'm sure especially for you through these difficult months and years, that we feel extra vulnerable and we realize the fragility of life. There are times when we're bereft, and that's okay. We don't have to hurry through that. But we can say, and we know for sure, that love itself lives on. Our adored one, our cherished one, still lives with us, in us, connected with us through our love for him or her, our love for them. And our memories of our precious one will always be imprinted in our hearts. So I say to you, as you go forth from here, may the bright light of your loved one and his or her, their signature life, be with you and spur you to love with all your heart and mind, to love fiercely, like it's the only thing left for you to do, because it is. Go forth in love. Blessings on you again from all the staff here at Evergreen Washelli Funeral Home. Thank you for being with us here tonight. Go your way in peace. So again, we're going to do something again a little bit different than what we've done in the past.
we have the ornaments that are not hanging on the tree. And I'm going to invite maybe you first to take one or two of the ornaments, and please feel free to take them home with you. And also please feel free to